So, it's such a pleasure to meet you, Rupert.
Well, thanks for getting in touch.
Before we start, I would like to explain to you a little bit what the idea is of these in-depth conversations. Um, First of all, I would like to stick, which might not be easy, to the actual topic, which is realizing God. And there are so many conferences, and usually it's about consciousness, maybe pure consciousness, even maybe about love and peace, and so on and so on. But I feel like it's really, really about God because it's really beyond words
Mm.
and hard to explain. But still, I want to give it a try, especially with you. You
All
know,
right. Well, I'm up for that. Yeah.
that's
Yes.
great.
All right. Well, I'm given the fact that we're not able to know much about God through direct. Well, if we have a knowledge through direct experience, it may be inexpressible. Anyway, we'll try.
We'll
I'm
try.
certainly willing to try. When I was a child, my parents were quite religious, and so was I. I used to pray every day, and I felt, I had a happy family, and I felt quite close to nature. Um,
Right.
so I didn't have a problem sleeping or worrying about God or anything. But then, as part of my scientific education, I soon realized that my science teachers at school, and indeed the whole atmosphere of science education, was atheistic and materialist. And I wanted to be a scientist, and I bought into that whole package. I stopped praying. I was at a boarding school. I had to go to church. It was compulsory. And indeed, I quite enjoyed it. I was in the choir and enjoyed singing, and I also played the organ. So I enjoyed the music and the services up to a point, but I didn't really believe that this was real. And it wasn't really until I was in my, what, late 20s that I came to felt a connection with what I now call God.
Yeah.
So it didn't happen in a direct, a kind of mystical way as a child, although I think I was aware of the presence of God and throughout my childhood, partly because of my family. But for me, the first experience when I felt a tremendous sense of revelation and connection and presence was in India when I was in a remote village in the Himalayas in 1968 with a friend who was an anthropologist. We met a sadhu in a cave. We'd gone for a walk, and he gave me his chillum to smoke with what must have been very strong cannabis, which I hadn't taken before. And he made an invocation to the god Shiva. He said, "This is Shiva's holy plant, and the god Shiva will bless us." He chanted a mantra, then gave me this to smoke. And for me, it was an extraordinary blessing. I mean, I'd never experienced cannabis, so I didn't know what to expect. What actually happened was a sense of tremendous divine presence I felt I was in the presence of God. The mountains looked incredibly beautiful. The grass looked greener than normal. I just felt extremely blissful. And I felt that this was not just a normal state or even just a drug-induced change. It felt completely real that I was in this greater presence. And I later had experiences when I got back to Cambridge, with LSD. So for me, as a materialist, indoctrinated with the materialist worldview, it took chemical substances to sort of blast me out of it.
Mhm.
And if I hadn't been so indoctrinated with materialism, I might have been more open to these spiritual experiences. But as it was, when I took the LSD, again, I had something like a death and rebirth experience. I felt I'd gone down into hell and I was going to be mad or die or
Right, right. Yeah.
I just
What I'm
felt
talking about. Yeah.
terrified. And then I felt as though I was coming up towards the surface of the water from deep down, breaking through the surface into the sunlight, and the world was transformed into a world of incredible beauty and divine presence. And again, it felt completely real that it was like that. And after that, I realized that actually there was a greater realm of consciousness. I started meditating soon after that because I wanted to explore consciousness in other ways. And after that, I've had many experiences, both through meditation, some through psychedelics, some through religious services, beautiful services, some through beautiful places in the natural world, where I felt this really strong connection, this divine presence. So much so that I don't doubt that this is God and that we can be open to God's presence. Most of the time we're too busy doing other things or too preoccupied. But I feel that that potential is always there, and that it's closed off. It was closed off for me for many years. It's closed off part of the day, every day, because one's busy doing other things, getting on with normal life, doing emails and things, cooking and so forth. But I feel that that's in the background all the time. I meditate every morning and I don't always go beyond, in fact, rarely go beyond watching the run of normal thoughts going through my mind. I mean, one's distanced from them through the meditation, but still, I'm aware of how much of the mind is just producing an endless stream of thoughts. I pray every evening, and that's a rather different activity for me, because in prayer I directly address God at the beginning. All prayers begin with an invocation to God or a saint, or
Mm.
so all prayers start with an invocation, like the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. So I start, like anyone does who prays, with an explicit connection or invocation. And then in my prayers, I feel to varying degrees the presence of God, which I invite to pervade my life and those I know and enter into my daily activities. So I feel that prayer is a way of less dramatic way of making this connection and bringing it into one's daily life. So those are something of my own experiences.
So there are many ways to come closer to God. Like one thing um, which I observed from your life story is that you were willing not to know. And I feel like this willingness to be completely open or to do this, make this paradigm shift, also that happened in your life, to be able to doubt everything, to question everything. Like for me, this openness, this willingness, that's like a pathway to God, to this greater reality.
Yes, in my case, what I felt I needed to question, I mean, I'd already questioned religion through my adolescent feeling of superiority. The point about the materialist worldview that most people are educated into through our secular educational system is to make people feel religion's just irrelevant, a thing of the past, whereas science and reason and progress are where we should be. And and that is a very common default worldview of educated people. A lot of people say, I don't believe in religion, I just believe in science. But I was like that. And I accepted this scientific worldview, which is basically materialism. I questioned religion. It's just mythology, it's just people being indoctrinated, it's just people, following the sheep like sheep, and so on. I certainly questioned religion and how do we know miracles really happened and why there's no evidence for God. I did all that. And I thought that was really smart of me. I mean, most people who are
Yeah.
are really smart. Um,
Same here.
Yes. I mean, that's almost the only advantage of atheism, it seems to me, the feeling that you're really smart. I mean, it's an illusory feeling most of the time, but nevertheless, I think that's I mean, for me, when I was growing up, since I'm terribly old, you know, when I was at school in the 1950s and at I went to Cambridge as an undergraduate in 1960, and there were still rather repressive ideas about sex. The other advantage of atheism was that I didn't feel guilty about sex. That was a big selling point of the atheist worldview, whereas the kind of rather puritanical Protestantism of my family did make me feel guilty about sex. So atheism did have two pluses. One, it made me feel smart, and secondly, it made me fairly guilt-free about sex. But so I'd questioned religion, but for me, the real questioning that really made a big difference after that was beginning to question the dogmas of science. Because in my own life, the real blind faith and dogmatic belief system that I'd adopted was not religion. Like most people, I'd questioned that. I mean, it's a standard thing in secular Western Europe for teenagers to do that. But it's not a standard thing to question the dogmas of science. And I began to question those at first when I was 17, not because of profound intellectual reflection, but because of personal experience. And the experience was that I was so keen to be a scientist. When I left school, I was 17. I was always a year ahead of I jumped a year at school because they thought I was smart and I would put me upper class. So I left school at 17. Usually in England, you leave at 18. And before I went to Cambridge, I wanted to get experience as a scientist. So I wrote to pharmaceutical companies in London, asked if they had a temporary job as a research technician in a laboratory so I could get research experience. And one of them wrote back and said yes, and they gave me a job. And so for 6 months, I worked in a pharmaceutical company in London as a junior technician. But what I didn't know when I took the job, it was I was a junior technician in a vivisection laboratory. And it was my job to gas all the animals that survived the tests at the end of every day. I was running the gas ovens in this
Oh my
Holocaust.
God.
And, you know, and I was also getting cats ready for vivisection and, you know, doing various experiments on other animals. Probably the most interesting one was where we were doing research on LSD and its effect on day-old chicks. And we were looking for other drugs that were like LSD. You injected the chicks with LSD and they had a visual cliff. There was a table and a sheet of glass going off the end of the table. The LSD chicks the normal chicks got to the end, looked over the edge and walked back. The LSD chicks looked over the and carried straight on.
I believe I can fly.
Anyway, the point is that this vivisection lab, I mean, I'd gone into biology because I loved animals. I kept lots of pets as a child, and I was very interested in plants too. So I was doing science because I loved animals. And then I discovered that all this was doing was killing and torturing animals, and every day, you know, it was all the ones that survived, I had to gas them. And this was kind of a death camp for animals, this laboratory that I was working in. And it made me really upset. You know, why these animals don't deserve just to be treated like this. But my colleagues said, oh, well, they're nothing but, you know, mechanisms, and, you know, animals don't really have feelings, and, you know, all the standard mechanistic stuff, and it's all for the good of humanity anyway. But it made me question this whole mechanistic approach to life, that animals are just inanimate mechanisms, that they don't really have feelings, that science is all about just getting the secrets from nature, and it doesn't matter if we inflict suffering on animals. It made me begin to think there was something really wrong with mechanistic science. And when I got to Cambridge and was studying biology, I noticed that the first thing we did to any animals or plants we were studying was to kill them, or vivisect them. So I, I then began to feel that this kind of science is alienating from nature. There's something about science which is creating barriers with our understanding of nature, not making us closer to nature, but taking us away from nature. And at that stage, when I was an undergraduate, one of my friends who was studying German literature introduced me to the ideas of Goethe, and his ideas about science and his critique of science, mechanistic science, particularly his more holistic approach to the color and to the forms of plants. And so through Goethe, I had the idea there could be a different kind of science, a more holistic kind of science. And that planted a seed in me, which actually has dominated really the rest of my scientific career, looking for a more holistic approach to science and questioning the dogmas of mechanistic materialism. So for me, questioning science was the thing that made the biggest difference. Questioning religion was easy and came cheap because that was just standard part of the secular educational system and of the growing up process in Britain at the time.
Yeah. You know, would you agree that in this world, although we might not be able to experience God because God is the source of all that can be experienced, we can still feel his presence indirectly. So, like you said, a couple of things. One is beauty, just mind-blowing beauty, which also silences the mind and which makes us humble. And another thing is that God is almighty and all loving, and so you came closer step by step by step by realizing, oh, it's not right to kill animals. This for me, this is an expression of the connection to God that we feel, like the Taoists say. They say it's all about harmony, to be at one with the Tao, and you just kept following that and seeing for yourself. No, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel true. Again, the very famous saying is, "The truth will set you free." That's what I mean. You were willing to question everything and say, okay, even if I'm not mainstream, even if I'm a cast out and people will laugh at me and I'm not able to publish in magazines and so on and so on, or it will be hard at least for some time, you were willing to do that. And for me, you're describing in your life story all these different pathways, to God, or how God reflects in our life. And also this is exactly what I mean. Something in you felt true, felt real, although there was no external judge. Nobody told you have to do this or you have to do that. But just like Moses on the mountain, who felt, okay, I just cannot do this. I cannot kill. I cannot betray. I cannot cheat. It's just impossible the closer we come to God, because God is the creator of the universe. He is not destructive in any way, right? And so it's like we get similar to God by approaching him, by getting closer.
Well, it's the question is to. No, I agree that part of that, I felt that I had to work independently. I was partly because my father was a very independent thinker. He
Right.
was a pharmacist and a herbalist, and he had a microscope laboratory. He was an amateur microscopist. So, and he taught me the names of plants and things. But one of his slogans was "Be independent." He himself was a self-employed business person, and on our local town council, he was a councillor elected to the council but he didn't believe in being a member of a political party. He was elected as an independent. So part of his motto was independence. So part of that I probably inherited from my father, that attitude of independence. And that is part comes also with the kind of Protestant tradition that my parents had. They were Methodists, which is a kind of, it split off from the Church of England in the 18th century, the Methodist Church. And it was all about self-reliance and not being part of the establishment and doing things independently. So it was, so I think as part of the culture of that I was brought up with, helped with that. But in relation to God being loving, certainly when we experience God, God is experienced as loving. But that then leads to the problem of the destructive forces in the world. A lot of people say they don't believe in God because there's so much suffering in the world. And how could a loving God allow all this suffering? So I think one of the...
Question. It's a fundamental good question, yeah.
Yes, it's a fundamental question, and it's one that many people wrestle with. And a number of atheists are atheists because they say they can't believe in a God, because an all-loving God, how could there be so many people starving? How could there be horrible diseases and parasites and all that kind of thing? So I think it's actually one way in dealing with, I mean, there's lots of theologians who've spent lots of time trying to explain this. The whole subject of theodicy is about trying to prove how a loving God is consistent with a world full of suffering. But I actually think that it's probably a mistake to think that God is nothing but love, because God as the creator is also the destroyer. And the creation of the universe involves the creation not only of stars and galaxies, but also of supernovas, stars that explode, and galaxies that collide. And the death and life are all intimately bound together. Living organisms can only live because there's also death within them. And my work as a PhD student at Cambridge was on the production of plant hormones. And I was very influenced by Goethe, because Goethe said that, death is life's means of having life in more abundance, that death is part of life. And I discovered that the main plant hormone, auxin, indole acetic acid, is actually made by dying cells within plants, particularly the wood cells. When the wood cells die, they commit suicide. And as their proteins break down, they release tryptophan, an amino acid. And as that breaks down, it releases indole acetic acid. So I discovered that actually the key to life growth of plants is the death that happens within them. And I then went on to develop a theory of aging and senescence. The key to the rejuvenation of cells is asymmetric cell division, where one cell takes on all the junk, all the breakdown products, and rejuvenates the other cell. So one dies so the other can live. This is death and life are interwoven. And so destruction is, in a way, part of creation. And if we look at the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, then God's certainly not all loving. I mean, Moses, the Jewish people are allowed to go free from Egypt because of appalling curses that God visits on the Egyptians, killing all the firstborn, having a plague of flies, terrible things happen. And so God is also a force of destruction. And I think this is made more clear, really, in Hinduism, where the god Shiva is the creator and the destroyer. He's dancing in the midst of the Nataraja, the dancing Shiva, is in flames of fire all around. And fire is transformative. It can destroy as well as create. And Shiva creates by destroying, or destroys and creates as a result. And also in Islam, among the 99 names of God, God is the lifter up, and God is also the caster down, and God is the creator, God is also the destroyer. So I think that one has to see that the creation itself involves process of destruction, death, disease, and although underlying it all is a loving God, the way the creation works and the way what God works through the creation is not all just love and freedom from pain and so forth. Those are all part of the creation for whatever reason.
Mm. Yeah, I would definitely agree. Um, like I see it, we're talking about not the human view what love is, like if you love me, you don't hurt me, you don't say anything with um, which hurts me, and so on and so on. But like you said, like when the Titanic goes down, the elder people will say, okay, it's better we go, we die, we stay here so you can live, or many, many other examples. So it's more like cyclish. Um, yeah, it's not, this love is not um, bound to our imagination, what we perceive as love. And I feel that's very, 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 very important, actually.
Mm.
Because otherwise, we think if God doesn't do what I perceive as love, then obviously he, she, it cannot exist. And if he doesn't do what I want, then I turn away. But it's rather like the opposite down. And maybe we can go into the topic of prayer here, because I feel like a true prayer is like um, coming, be, being in tune with God's will. It's not so much asking for God doing something for me, but rather God asking to reveal what is his will so I can do it, so there will be no suffering and unnecessary pain. So I would distinguish between violence and unnecessary violence, between pain and which is inevitable, and pain which is just self-inflicted, and which just come from stubbornness and from egotistical thinking and so on. So what would you say?
Yes. Well, in terms of prayer, I agree that it's a matter of praying that ultimately God's will is done. I mean, it's in the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. It's right there at the beginning of the Lord's Prayer. So that's the context for all our prayers. But then there's a lot of different practices among people who pray as to how they pray. I once belonged to a group in Cambridge. We had retreats together over Easter. We would live together as a spiritual community. We prayed together. We had services together. It was a Christian community. And once we were discussing prayer, and I suggested that instead of talking about it in abstract, we went round the circle and each person described how they prayed. And that was incredibly revealing. I mean, I knew these people very well. We prayed together in, the formal services of the Church of England, morning prayer, evening prayer, Holy Communion. And we'd known each other for a long time, and we lived as a community. But what I didn't know was just how very differently people prayed. There were some people who said that they felt there's no need in prayer to tell God what to do because God knows everything. And so it's a matter of just holding people or the situation in the light of God's love and leaving it up to God, what happens, and not presuming to tell God what to do. There are other people who said that the example of Jesus in the New Testament is for very specific prayers. God prays for particular people to get better. He prays for particular outcomes, and it's very specific. And the argument of those people was that God wants us to be co-creators, and we co-create through prayer by actually formulating intentions and
Definitely, yeah.
specific intentions in our prayer which should be generically they should generically fit with the will of God, but the specific outcomes we can pray for, which need to be specific. Now, I mean, some people take this extremely literally. When I was living in the ashram of Father Bede Griffiths in South India, a Christian Benedictine ashram in Tamil Nadu, one of the Indian Christians who was living there was very impressed by the fact I had a telescopic umbrella that I brought from England, because they didn't have any telescopic umbrellas in India at that time. And so he wanted one, and he said it would help him in his work going around villages preaching God's word and so forth. So
Sorry, I just have to laugh. They have no television, they have no radio, but now they had a telescopic umbrella.
that's it. Telescope. Well, I didn't give it to him because it was mine, but he really wanted one. I said, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, I will pray for God to give me one. And so he was very specific. He asked God to give him a telescopic umbrella. And 2 days later, I was just in the ashram, and he walked into the ashram holding a telescopic umbrella. And so I said, and here's a huge smile on his face. So I said, what happened, Isaac? What happened? He said, I prayed for it. Here it is. And I said, what happened? He said, I was walking along the road. He said, and a bus went past very fast. And then this telescopic umbrella fell off the bus and landed at my feet.
That's unbelievable.
Yes.
What are the chances? One in a billion. One in a billion, I would say.
But you see, he wasn't that surprised, because he said God answers prayers, and he always prayed very specifically, and he was used to having his prayers answered. So for him, it was just yet more evidence about God's power to answer prayer. So you see, now that wouldn't have happened if somebody had said, oh, I just want to hold the welfare of the world in the light of God and not going to make any specific requests because God knows what to do. Here was a case where he'd made a very specific prayer, and it was answered very specifically. Now, of course, not all specific prayers are answered at all. But anyway, that's a style of praying which some people have, and which other people don't have. And what surprises me is that whenever I ask my friends how they pray, I almost always come up with a whole variety of methods of prayer, but they're usually between the spectrum of not making any specific prayers at all to making highly specific prayers, and there's a kind of spectrum in between.
Right. Yeah, I think we're on the same page here, and I especially loved how you described it, that God actually wants us to be co-creators or to create through us, and that actually prayer can be, if our prayers are answered, in some way it shows us, are we already in line with the divine will? So I'm very, very positive that this, what was his name? Father Griffith?
Father Bede Griffiths.
Yeah. So that he was very much in line with the divine will, and therefore he was also very, very, he had a lot of trust that therefore, because he doesn't stray from God's will, if he really wants something, if he feels like, oh, that's it, then it's in accordance. And so this is like a prayer can be like always like a feedback loop, how genuine are you? How do you have the humbleness? Do you have, like how I described is that to first make sure that you have some degree of surrender. And then if you're sure, then you can take on again, say, okay, like for me, in my life, it was like, first I was manifesting and all kinds of stuff. You must know it, the secret and so on. And then more and more, I came to realize that when I didn't manifest, when I didn't try to make anything happen or even pray, what happened was so much better. I thought, okay, I'm going to stop it because God's will for me is better than what my will is. Like this is the metaphor maybe of the allegory of the crucifixion. Like Jesus, in Jesus there is still some wanting, 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 and okay, thy will be done, and this is the end of suffering. So, but then there's also the resurrection, and then we can start really anew. What do you think?
Yes. Incidentally, it wasn't Father Bede who prayed for the telescopic umbrella, but one of the young men living in his ashram, who was a devotee of Father Bede's.
Ah, in
Uh,
his place. Oh, wow.
but certainly, I think that when one's in accordance, well, if you look at the New Testament and life of Jesus or of his early disciples, their prayers were quite specific, and again, that as you were saying, that's because they were in general accordance with doing the will of God. I think the point you made about manifesting is interesting because positive thinking, or the so-called New Thought movement of the 19th century, which led, especially in America, leads to all these books about positive thinking, like The Power of Positive Thinking. Um, uh,
Mm.
uh,
Master key system and so on. Yeah.
yes,
Mm.
those are all about how you just create the intention and then it will come true. That's like prayer. It's like a secularized form of prayer. It's not really about doing God's will. It's about using the power of thought to sell more vacuum cleaners or to succeed in love and business. And the power of positive thinking is the person who was actually raised on this. The key guru of that in the 1950s and 60s was Norman Vincent Peale, who had
Mm.
a kind of positive thinking church in Manhattan, New York. In one of his principal devotees as a teenager was none other than Donald Trump. And in fact, Norman Vincent Peale married Trump to his first wife because Trump's whole family were into positive thinking.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes,
Okay.
it makes Trump a lot easier to understand when you realize that his whole life has been based on this power of positive thinking. If you lose the election, doesn't matter, just say you've won it. So he's and then you'll win the next one. It may come true. So Trump has the weirdness of Trump, and also the extraordinary success of Trump. Given his huge limitations as a human being and his destructive effects. I mean, what's the secret of this man's success? Well, one secret is positive thinking, and it's not a very good advertisement for positive thinking, but it does show that the secularized form of prayer, namely the manifesting your thoughts, your desires and stuff through the power of thought, is taking the power of prayer away from doing the will of God and making it more about just doing your will. And it shows that thought itself can have these powers even without God.
Mm.
But it's much better, of course, if it's with the will of God and in the context of the divine will.
Right.
But I think that this whole self-help, positive thinking thing, which is so strong in the United States and has such an enormous influence on American character, is this secularized version of prayer.
Absolutely. I mean, this reminds me how I started on my spiritual path after I suppressed everything, I had encountered when I was just 8 years old. I suppressed everything, and then I became quite successful. Even at the age of 30, I was already a lecturer at the University of Vienna at the faculty of psychology. And this is also a great parallel between our lives because I was so fed up with institutional psychology because they measured love in a really ridiculous way. We injected someone with adrenaline, and then he fell in love with someone he met on the bridge, and this proves, in my eyes, this proves nothing. This is so ridiculous. this has nothing to do with real love. But I was so successful already at that time, and I had to realize I'm hollow. I feel empty. I don't feel fulfilled, although I reached all my goals, although I was not aware of Buddhism at that time, but it's exactly like Buddha described that, like all this wanting, 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 even if you get what you deserve, you won't feel fulfilled, right?
Mm.
You will only feel fulfilled when you feel this, like you described it, this connection with the divine. Like it was not about the substance you took back in the caves in India, but it was about the connection, right? That made you feel so blissful. It was not that tree and not that mountain and not that grass, whatever. It was that connectedness, right?
Yes, and I think that the chemical substance, in that case cannabis, sort of helps to remove barriers to that connection. It's not the source of the connection, it's the remover. It can remove the barriers of our normal thinking that block off that connection, which is potentially present all the time.
Yeah, so that's the path to God, back to God is also the path to fulfillment, to yeah, Satchitananda, to the especially to the Ananda part.
Exactly. I mean, if Ananda is part of the divine being, then whenever we feel close to God, then it makes sense that it usually feels joyful or blissful,
Right.
because that's the way the divine mind or God's nature ultimately is.
What's the name of that children's game where they have to say warmer, warmer, colder, colder, and they're blindfolded? How do you call it in England? Does it exist?
Yes, I've forgotten the name of that game.
In
It's not
German, it's like blind cow,
it's
but
not. Yeah, I've forgotten. I shouldn't. I mean, I've for some reason forgotten the name, but I know what you mean. You're
you know
getting.
what I mean. So
Yes.
it's like following our heart and to feel where does it get more blissful? Okay, in this direction, and this is how I feel, how we come closer to God. We follow, yeah, actually, that's what Buddha said. Follow your bliss. Happiness is the way, right?
Mm. Well,
Even
there are
although
things.
there's suffering.
This is where I think spiritual practices can help us because, sometimes these revelations of divine presence happen spontaneously. For some people, they could just be in a beautiful place and suddenly they have this feeling of divine presence. Or sometimes they happen through near-death experiences, which, as a result of an accident, no one wants to have an accident, but sometimes they have a serious accident and then they float out of their body, have a near-death experience, which changes their lives because they find themselves in this joyful divine presence. Even if it's only brief, it has to be only brief because it's a near-death experience, not a death experience, so they have to come back. But spiritual practices can help us in all this. And my two most recent books, one is called Science and Spiritual Practices, and the other one is called Ways to Go Beyond and Why They Work. Each one deals with 7 different spiritual practices, including prayer, connecting with nature, meditation, singing and chanting, rituals, fasting, and pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is one of them, and actually that's one of the ones I've got very interested in recently. And I helped start an organisation called the British Pilgrimage Trust. And what we're doing is reopening the ancient footpath pilgrimage routes in Britain to the ancient holy places, including the great cathedrals, also pre-Christian holy places, and places like the sources of rivers. And this is proving very popular. And I think because Britain's a Protestant nation, pilgrimage was banned in the 16th century. In 1538 in England, it was made illegal to go on a pilgrimage. And
That's weird.
the monasteries, which were the infrastructure for pilgrimage, because that's where pilgrims stayed and got fed, those were all destroyed or dissolved. And the shrines that the pilgrims went to were destroyed. This was Henry VIII, the Protestant Reformation. I think that this created a vacuum in the English soul, which is one reason I think the English invented tourism, which is, I think, a kind of secularized pilgrimage, a very unsatisfying form of pilgrimage. You still go to the great cathedrals and temples and holy places, but when you get there, you can't light a candle or say a prayer. You have to pretend that your main interest is art history. And all you can do is take photographs. So it's a kind of frustrated pilgrimage. But I think one of the interesting things that's happening in secular Europe at the moment is the revival of pilgrimage. Now, I don't know about Germany, but certainly in Scandinavia, which is like England, where pilgrimage was banned at the Reformation, there's been a tremendous revival with the pilgrimage from Oslo to Trondheim, to the cathedral, the shrine of St. Olaf, a footpath pilgrimage. It's very popular now in Scandinavia. Of course, in Roman Catholic countries, pilgrimage was not banned, except in France after the Revolution. But in Protestant countries, it was suppressed. And I think it's very interesting that it's coming back to life again. You know, after 500 years, it's reviving. And I think one reason it's so attractive is that people who've been raised in a secular world, many of them feel a spiritual vacuum, and they want to be on a spiritual journey. And pilgrimage is literally a spiritual journey. You don't have to sign up to a belief system to do it. And in the British Pilgrimage Trust, when we take groups on pilgrimages, one of our slogans is, bring your own beliefs. So it's not about belief, it's about experience. And that's what's true of all these spiritual practices. And that's the important point, I think, about spiritual practices. They're about experience, and they're ways in which you can carry out practices that are likely to make spiritual experiences more likely. You can't turn them on like a tap, but you can do things that make it more likely that you'll be open to them. And so I think they have a major role to play.
Right, very beautiful. So this is about finding the deeper meaning of life within us, and to turn inwards and find truth and happiness inside of us, and not just blind faith, like you said, which doesn't really help, but to really trust in our own experience, that this capacity is within us, like we said.
Yeah, within us and around us, because I take the view that God is not only within us as the basis of our very consciousness and life itself, but also of the entire universe. So, you know, when I look up at the sky, when I was an atheist, I used to look up at the sky and just see space with physical objects obeying scientific laws. Now, when I look up at the sky, I think of the entire universe as filled with the being and the presence of God, and all these different worlds, literally different worlds, all these stars and galaxies, as all being different manifestations and working out of divine potentialities. And we have no idea what's happening on, you know, in other galaxies or in other solar systems. We don't know what forms of life are there. But I think, since I take a panentheistic view, I think that nature is alive, not dead, and I think stars and galaxies have their own forms of consciousness or mind or life. That I think we're in a living universe in which there are countless manifestations of the divine being and divine consciousness, and we happen to be in a form where we can access it through mystical experiences and spiritual practice. We can feel it from within. But I think when we realize the immensity of the universe outside us as well as within us, the divine presence all around us, then we become more connected with everything around us, with other people, with the nature of this world itself, the solar system, the galaxy, the whole universe, the whole divine creation. And for me, that's an important part of my experience of God, not just,
Mm.
but also as manifested in nature.
Yeah, for me, it's like only in this feeling of connectedness or even oneness does life make any sense at all. So there are many people who say, okay, each and everyone has to give life a meaning. But I feel it's like one piece of a puzzle trying to make sense. But one piece will never make sense, right? Only in this connection can we see, okay, it's not only about my achievements, but about the achievements of the whole of humanity, or I'm part of evolution, you know, like feeling part of the bigger picture is what gives meaning, right? Would you
Oh,
agree?
definitely. I'm really convinced of that, and but not only the bigger picture spiritually, but also, you see, I think one of the problems since the 17th century with the scientific revolution, which split the spiritual realm from nature, the Cartesian split, the famous split of Descartes, was that the spiritual realm was put into a separate compartment. God, angels, and human minds became supernatural outside nature, and nature, the whole universe, just became dead matter moving in accordance with mathematical laws. And then the atheists and materialists came along and they said, well, you can't prove the existence of God and angels, they're just imaginary things, in human minds. And human minds are nothing but the activity of brains. And so nature became this disenchanted realm of purely mechanical activity that could be understood scientifically. And then spirituality was driven into the realm of the purely subjective, only in humans. And that terrible split is still with us. And a lot of my scientific efforts are designed to try and recover the sense of the divine presence in nature, that this is not just mechanical, dead, autonomous, that we live in a living world, and the living world reflects the being of God. And we can still do science, and we can do better science, I think, by recognizing we live in a living world and that it's holistically interconnected. But part of my own effort is to try and recover that sense of nature being infused with God. In the Middle Ages, especially in the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas and other great medieval philosophers, there was no split between God and nature. Nature was in God and God was in nature. That's called panin,
Mm.
God in nature and nature in God. And then there was this terrible split from the 17th century onwards. And so what I hope we can return to is a sense where there's no longer this split between the realm of spirituality and of science, and where we split off the spiritual and the conscious from the physical and the natural. And so I think I personally like to get rid of the idea of the supernatural, because I think God is in nature and nature's in God, and that it's not a separate category.
Mm. Okay, I get it. Yeah. Mm.
So for me, the the paradigm shift in science that's beginning to happen is one that will make us able to live in a more harmonious world where our understanding of nature and our understanding of God are not in conflict or just on separate tracks, but can actually be related to each other.
Yes. Yes, and I feel like you're helping humanity as a whole a great deal with your with your books and with your research and everything. And maybe that leads me to the last question. Are you still doing research, and in what amount? And I know um, that you finance yourself independently. So is there anything like in as a part of the summit that you have like a donation account?
Well, that's very kind of you. Well, I find my research, I do have a sponsor for a wealthy man who helps cover the cost of my secretary, which makes my life much easier. And I have a small research grant from another wealthy person, which covers the cost of some of my research. But it's not very much money, and I'm engaged in research practically all the time. I don't do many talks and many interviews and things, partly because I try and do research. I think that's my most important contribution. So in the last year, I've published about 6 or 7 papers in peer-reviewed journals, and I have 2 or 3 more on the way. And the 2 most recent ones are about end-of-life experiences in animals. Dying animals often have a surge of energy, which is like dying people. With my colleague, Dr. Michael Nahm, who's in Germany in Freiburg, we published a paper on end-of-life experiences with animals based on case histories and their parallels with humans. The most recent paper that we've written together is on after-death communications from dead animals. People see them, feel them, experience their presence in the same way they do with deceased people, usually within the first few weeks after death. Many people experience these visitations. So we've done this based on large numbers of case histories that people send in. I'm also doing research on the extended mind, the way that the mind is extended beyond the brain in vision. Just whenever we look at something, I think our mind extends into the world around us. It's not just all inside the head.
Definitely. Mm.
And that is one of my main areas of research. That's where you can do experiments. You can actually find out things. You can increase science. It's not a spiritual phenomenon. I think that all animal vision involves the outward projection of images. And my research on telepathy is also not saying this is spiritual. I think it's just normal biological phenomenon, normal, not paranormal, natural, not supernatural. That I think that the sciences need to expand their understanding of nature, move from this narrow materialist dogmatism. So there's a lot more we can do that's still within the realm of the purely natural, as opposed to the spiritual, or at least the spiritual dimension, which is in everything. But these psychic dimensions are just part of an expanded view of life. So, well, if anyone wants to help my research, I don't have an automatic system for this, but if they email me, there's an email address on my website, sheldrake@sheldrake.org, and tell me how they'd like to support it. If they want to make a donation, I can give the details, the bank details, and also ask them what they'd like to make the donation for, rather than some kind of generic, impersonal system. They can get in touch direct. But, and that way, hopefully the money could be used either for the research or to support the British Pilgrimage Trust, which I mean, your listeners may not be mainly in Britain, probably not, but they may feel it better to support a German pilgrimage trust or a Swiss pilgrimage trust or whatever, or an
Although
Austrian.
this is going to be worldwide.
Yes. Well, our British Pilgrimage Trust is really trying to model how you can revive pilgrimage in a modern secular world, and hopefully it will provide models that can be applied quite easily in other parts of Europe and indeed other parts of the world. And we're now expanding our activities to include children's pilgrimages. I led one myself a few weeks ago, because we feel that it's important to introduce children to this possibility, because once you've got hold of the idea of pilgrimage, going on a journey with intention to a holy place, you can apply it anywhere in the world, and it transforms one's experience of travel and relating to nature and relating to holy places.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. There, it's completely normal.
It's
To
normal in all traditional cultures. I mean, Hindus have pilgrimage, Buddhists have it, Sikhs have it, Jews have it to Jerusalem. And of course, Christians have had many holy places. The most important in Europe is, of course, Santiago de Compostela. And that has undergone a huge revival. And, from the 1980s, about 1,000 people a year walked there. It's now about 500,000. I mean, it's a massive expansion of pilgrimage going on in our lifetimes. It's a major social movement in Europe. Anyway, so in response to your question, then, I don't have a generic response, but if anyone would like to support what I'm doing in research or the Pilgrimage Trust, email me and I'll respond and say how it could most easily be done.
Okay, that's great. So thanks, Rupert, so much. It was a very beautiful conversation. I enjoyed it. It's such a delight. And now all the best for your research, for you personally. And thanks for your huge contribution to the evolution of the consciousness of all of humanity, actually.
Well,
That's
Mark, thank you. I've much enjoyed our conversation, and I think it's very important that you're doing your work and raising people's awareness of experiences of God. And in our modern secular scorched earth, Europe, I think that nothing could be more important, really, than reconnecting with the spiritual dimension.
Okay, thank you very much, Rupert.
Good. All right.
Good, all right.
Good. Well, that was very enjoyable, Mark, and I hope the rest of your summit goes very well.